Republicans surge as we head into the final weeks of the midterm election season. The president's approval numbers continue their dismal trajectory, though he assures us that candidates still want him to campaign for them. At least 16 of them do. And later, the tragic story of Casey Miller and the latest in the fight against the trans agenda. Will Democrats really continue to push for the mutilation and butchering of children, even in an election year? We'll dig into all of it in today's episode of The Chris Merlino Show.
Made in America. Made in America.
Yes, indeed, Mr. President. Yes, indeed. And we have two words for you as well. Let's go, Brandon. Folks, welcome to episode 2 of the Chris Merlino Show. I am your host, Chris Merlino, here to take you through a couple hours of talk about the midterms, talk about the trans agenda. We're going to talk about some things going on in the what we call the expert class in America, the elite class, and but prior to that, I noticed something just in the last couple hours prior to going on, and I noticed that there's a video floating around out there, and it is of NBC or MSNBC, excuse me. Apparently, MSNBC ventured out into the darkness of middle America. They got their passports. They got their vaccine cards updated. They boosted. They had their N95 masks on hand just in case of new CDC guidelines. And they ventured out into red state, MAGA, semi-fascist country. And they stumbled on some Trump voters, apparently. And they decided to ask the Trump voters about January 16th, and it didn't go the way they were clearly expecting, though I don't know why they were expecting things to be any different, but apparently they were expecting something different. But I'm going to play a couple of clips here, and we'll just go through this real quick before we get into the show. I just thought it'd be amusing to start off with these.
Mastriano was at the insurrection and he was photographed breaching one of the restricted areas. Is that okay?
Which area? Because I saw a video where Capitol officers were taking away barriers and unlocking doors. People. So, I mean, they opened the gates.
So it shouldn't be disqualifying for an elected official if they participated in January 6th?
He didn't strike anybody. He didn't hurt anybody.
And the only one that died was a protester there, not a Capitol police
Unarmed
officer.
female veteran.
That's the only one that died.
That's the only one who died.
A police officer did die.
No, it was a stroke.
That's
not on site.
Caused by that. That's because he shouldn't have been a police officer.
Yeah, it's interesting how this is a professional journalist who is going out speaking to people about an event that happened 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago, and you would think that they would have at least come out with their facts straight. And it's kind of like a lawyer in a case. One of the first rules of law school, I think any trial lawyer will tell you that the one thing that you do not want to do in a trial is to ask a question to a witness and when you don't know what their answer is going to be, because the last thing you need is for them to say something that completely upends your case. And for the last 18 months, 20 months, the left, the media and the Democrats have been pushing this narrative that the January 6th riot was actually a insurrection on a level of of a national coup that you see in the third world, that armed protesters killed police outside the Capitol building, and they stormed the Capitol and put everybody's life in danger. And AOC, even though she wasn't even in the building, she was in a building down the street, was in danger of her life, thought she was going to be abducted and raped and murdered and all this just abject lunacy. And yet the only person that was killed on the January 6th riots was Ashley Babbitt, who was an unarmed protester who was trying to enter the Capitol building. Now, up front, no sensible person on the right likes what they saw on January 6th. Nobody thinks that the January 6th riots were a good thing or a positive thing, or that that's what you're supposed to do when you don't like the outcome of an election, and or even if you have a legitimate gripe with the way the election was held and you think that the election was stolen, there are ways to go about making your voice heard and so forth. And so nobody on the right, we don't want to see that. And what January 6th was to people like me, people on the right, really what it was ammunition for the left to accuse people who disagree with them of being just like these violent protesters. But the fact of the matter is that the January 6th events of January 6th was little more than a riot. It was several hundred people who got out of hand and stormed the Capitol. And they went in and they took pictures. In a lot of cases, they were just walking around, almost tourists-like, just, being idiots. And, some people went into Pelosi's office and took their pictures and stuff like that. And it was stupid, and it was, in some cases, it was violent. There was scuffles with the police and altercations, but nothing like the events of the summer preceding in 2020, where Black Lives Matter and Antifa tore this entire country apart, city by city, and including burning police stations to the ground and attacking citizens and business owners and just what have you. And so you go in to interview Trump voters, and the Trump voters know what January 6th was all about. And you just saw what was fascinating about that clip was the shock. The journalist's name is Elise Jordan. And just she was just completely baffled that these people didn't see things the way she did, and that they didn't see January 6th as this turning point in American politics the way she did, as if it was, the equivalent of 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or, the War of 1812 when the Capitol actually did get razed and burned to the ground. The left sees January 6th as a momentous occasion in American politics. To some extent it was, but only because they made it into that. The fact of the matter was it was a few hours of stupidity and in some cases some mild violence. But again, the only person that died as a result of it was the one unarmed former, I think, Air Force veteran, Ashley Babbitt. She was shot and killed by a Capitol policeman. And that was it. Every other death or injury that they accuse the rioters of doing was all after the fact medical conditions. It had nothing to do with the riot and had nothing to do with violence of any kind. It just one guy had a stroke, and there was a couple people weeks or maybe it was months later committed suicide. There's no evidence that it had anything to do with the events of January 6th. There's no evidence that it had anything to do with the election or whatever. And Trump supporters and people on the right tend to be a little more informed than these MSNBC people are used to. And she walked into just a stunner of an argument, and you'd think that somebody would have been aware, like, okay, here's how these people are going to react. We got to be ready for it, and they just weren't. And the conversation continued, and it didn't get any better for her.
What do you make, though, overall of January 6th? I mean, watching that footage, it was pretty disturbing. I mean, there were people throwing excrement at the walls.
It looked a lot like Antifa's action.
Yeah, it looked a lot of except on a much smaller scale, what the same as the Black Lives Matter riot.
Kenosha.
But so it's okay just because one side that you disagree with.
I'm
is
saying
okay
it's even
for-
It's
infiltrated.
good for one, it's good for the other.
Anybody
I don't
who
see it
harms
that way.
anybody who caused property destruction, that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah,
But if
that's
you're
what
there
you're
making
saying.
your voice heard at the people's house, no less, it's a fundamental constitutional right of an American citizen, and people should not be being held political prisoner because of it.
That's East Germany
That's East Germany.
tactics.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you see how she moved the goalposts? And this is something the left does all the time. When you throw back at them their own violence, then they say things like, oh, well, that's whataboutism, or two wrongs don't make a right, and all of these other little terms and that are meant to deflect the fact that you've got this one event, and everybody on the right, we're all capable of saying that, yes, that is an unfortunate day. It was a horrible day. It was an embarrassment to America and American politics. Okay, on one hand, and then on the other hand, it wasn't an insurrection, and it was far more tame and far less destructive than what BLM and Antifa did just 6 months prior to it. And all of that can be true at the same time. You don't have to be a supporter of rioting the Capitol building because Trump got defeated in an election. You don't have to support that in order to condemn all violence and recognize that it also wasn't the end of the world. And quite frankly, that day really did demonstrate something that I think a lot of people have neglected to mention, especially even on the right. The fact of the matter of January 6th is that even though there was an effort to obstruct the proceedings, the counting of the votes of the election, that just within a few hours, this was all cleaned up and the electoral votes were all counted. So this insurrection amounted to just a few hours of inconvenience, some damage, and a dead rioter. And democracy continued. The republic, the process went through, and there was a transfer of power, and it was a peaceful transfer of power because there was a very minimal, just a few hours of this rioting and so forth. It really didn't affect the transfer of power. Joe Biden took office in complete safety on January 20th. Remember, it was 2 weeks before the actual transfer of power. And once January 6th, those events were over, there was no more. They had the Capitol locked down like it was in a war zone, but it was unnecessary that once events calmed down that day, it was all over. So anyway, just a quick mention of that because I saw it going around and I thought that it was kind of amusing. They just have no idea what Trump voters, red state America, these people, they have no idea what we think, how we think, how we view the world. And it is so stark when they come out and they actually listen to what we're saying. They're just completely unprepared for it. Anyway, moving on. The elections are coming. This midterm race, no matter what the race, no matter where the race is, the question to America is basically the same. All right, the question is this: does America care that the Democrat Party has gotten 100% of everything wrong? Buck Sexton said this last week, and I think it's exactly the way to look at it. The Democrat Party has run this nation into the ground financially, economically, militarily, academically. They've gotten the science wrong on everything. They've gotten education wrong. They've got COVID wrong. That the vaccines they got wrong. They're getting the border wrong. They got foreign policy wrong. They surrendered Afghanistan. They invited Putin to invade Ukraine. We're on the precipice of a nuclear war. They've just been wrong about every single thing. And now everyone knows it. because let's just face it, you've got complete control of government. They are ramming through bills without Republican support, and when you hold both houses and you hold the presidency, and you've got the media and you've got Hollywood and you've got the institutions and you've got the universities, and everything lines up with you, and things are this bad, it's on you. And it's very obvious that it's on you. So the question is, does America care? Does it matter that they've been wrong about everything for 2 years, going on 2 years now? Remember the utter insanity during the COVID response, the lies, the tyranny, the censorship, 2 years worth. Crazies are running the show, and there has not been the slightest bit of accountability for any of it. No one's apologized for getting any of this so wrong. No one's taking responsibility for the misery that America is still going through. Forget about what they were put through for 2 years, but what America's still going through. They're trying even to bring some of it back. They're trying to find ways to keep the COVID hysteria alive. That has to do with being able to influence how elections are run. But they're continuing to attack parents on multiple fronts. They're coming for the kids, whether it be sexually, medically, academically. They are coming, and they don't seem to care about the consequences. They think that this is their time, that they have their opportunity is now, and that they are going to be relentless. So the question is, does it matter? Does it matter to America? And right now, looking at these election polling and so forth, it looks an awful lot like it matters a lot. Americans do care. There is certainly a feeling, at least I'm getting a feeling, that there is a measure of sanity left among the voters, because I have to say that for a little while there, it really seemed like America at writ large has just given up, and it seemed like the teetering was going to topple over. It seemed like we were going to fall off the precipice, and we are still right there. But as I look at these polling numbers, things are looking worse and worse for Democrats every day that goes by. Joe Biden's not helping matters. In fact, even Democrats want nothing to do with him. And reporters are trying to ask him about it. But his ego, you have to if you know who Joe Biden is and you've followed him for his whole career, he's got an awful lot of video and audio available on Biden if you take the time to go back and look at it. This is a man who his ego is so frail. He's and he always was like this. It now in his old age, as he's sliding further and further into dementia, it bubbles up at the oddest times, and it's an uncontrollable thing, because obviously he's losing the parts of his mind that enable a guy to control himself and to control his impulse. But even when he was at his best, he was still the type of guy who would lash out. And his ego is so frail; it can't take even the slightest poke. And look at how pissed he gets at this reporter simply for asking about his light campaign schedule.
And that many candidates campaigning with you. Why are
That's
more?
not true. There's been 15. Count, kid, count.
Okay, and are there going to be even more?
Yeah.
Yeah, kid, count. I know I can count. I can count the 435 House campaigns that are going on right now. I can count the 33 Senate seats in play, and I can count the 36 governorships up for grabs across the nation. That's way over 500 important seats. It's not even including the down ballot seats that have more to do with local and municipal. But that's over 500 seats, and every one of them count. We saw that. Just look at the Senate, how one seat can swing a nation's future. And so America's going to be voting on these in a few weeks, 2 weeks now. And you're the president of the United States. Your party is floundering. All you have is 16 campaigns to go to out of 500 and what was it? 534, maybe another 20. I think he said, and you have the nerve to get snippy with the reporter. Now you may be thinking to yourself, hey, like a one-time thing. Who knows what was going on at the time? Who knows what he was dealing with, and so forth. It's just a one-off kind of response on the fly. But here's another reporter asking him the same thing.
Sir, why don't more candidates want to be seen in public with you like Mr. Fetterman?
Where did you buy it at?
I'm going to be on it.
He's such an idiot that he doesn't seem to understand that he's not helping his case by saying stuff like this. And by the way, did you happen to catch what he said at the end of that? So I cut the clip, right? And I listened to it like always to make sure I had the whole thing. And Biden says something at the end there that I cannot translate. I'm going to play the clip again. I want to see if you catch this.
Sir, why don't more candidates want to be seen in public with you like Mr. Fetterman?
Where did you buy it at?
What are you talking about? Tim Ryan in Ohio said he doesn't want you there. Warnock said wouldn't say. Do you think they're making a mistake?
No, there's 16 there I've already gone in for yet, and a lot more have asked. Another 20 or so. I'm going to be doing it.
Could you understand any of that? Because after I cut, I probably listened to this thing like 50 times trying to figure out that last bit, and I even took it to my wife, and I'm like, can you understand this? Because I've listened to it about 50 times, and I cannot find it. I'm just going to isolate that last piece, and I want you to catch this.
I'm going to be doing it.
Could any of you understand it? Go ahead and leave a comment in the comments section, or shoot me an email, chrismerlinoshow@gmail.com. But what I think he said is he's a Bibionia. What that is, I can't really tell you. But I think he definitely is a Bibionia. As far as I'm concerned, so are you if you ever vote Democrat again. So it's easy to spot the reason the president is a drag on his party going into the final stretch of a tough midterm election. You got to remember, and the other thing is, I think I mentioned this before, I look at the betting odds. I come from a betting, gambling background, and in the past, I spent a lot of time studying sports betting odds and how I one thing I noticed about the betting odds, and it seems like it's off subject because pollsters handle this for us, right? The polling does tell us some of the story, but often, the polls are out there representing what the pollsters want to represent, and they often understand Republicans, and they skew the data by the way they phrase their questions. But now, for the first time, the gambling markets are telling us something, and the reason I think the gambling markets tell us something is because that is real people putting up real money in an effort to try to guess the right winner. And I find that people, regardless of their political affiliations, when their money is on the line, they're not trying to make a point. People don't bet money in a losing effort to try to make a point. They try to get the winner. They want to win the money. And right now, for the first time, the gambling markets show, for example, Blake Masters as the favorite to win the Arizona Senate race over Mark Kelly. In fact, if you pay attention to the betting odds, and if you did this and we just assumed all the favorites are going to win, all right, you would see Blake Masters winning in Arizona, Herschel Walker's wins Georgia, Adam Laxalt will win Nevada. Obviously this requires the voters to show up. It's not just a static system. You have to show up and vote. So complacency here is not an option. Voting is the name of the game, no matter where you live and what you think of the likelihood that your vote matters. Okay, this election, all votes matter because America needs to send a resounding message. This is not one of these, I'm in a blue state. We don't happen to have a Senate seat going, but whether we did or didn't, I'd be at the voting polls making sure I got my vote in, and everybody I know that is of like mind, that tends Republican, I would want them to get their vote in, because just to close it up a little bit and show that things are tighter than even the left thinks. And we had a couple, the Democrats had a couple of scares in New Jersey back. The governor came very close to losing his seat. In fact, New Jersey did upend an important seat in our state house. So, all votes count, all votes matter, and it is imperative that Republicans, conservatives get out there and just get their votes in, because there are voters who are out there fighting. And I think as we move through this, we're going to see just how important it is that in some of these blue states that lean blue, states that you typically think are Democrat strongholds, we're going to see exactly how important it is and how close things are and how much of an opportunity Republicans have as the races tighten up and things get closer to Election Day. And so we'll just start in the House. The House is almost a foregone conclusion. And the Republicans are overwhelming favorites to take control of the House. The question is, how many seats will the majority end up with? And at this point, 20 to 30 is the likely scenario. It could get as high as 40. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I think that a realistic expectation is that the Republicans pick up 25 to 30, which would give them upwards of a 20-seat majority, give or take a few seats. And that is a solid Republican red wave if that happens. In the Senate, Real Clear Politics poll has Republicans favored to win 53 seats. Now, this is what I've been saying from the beginning. 53, possibly 52. With some of these Republican candidates, these races are a little closer than I would like, but 53 seats now seems to be the likely scenario. Herschel Walker really handled Warnock in their debate a week or two ago, just simply by staying on message, right? In Nevada, Adam Laxalt's poised to defeat Catherine Cortez Masto. Blake Masters is now, like I just mentioned, seems to have moved ahead of Mark Kelly. That's not reflected in the polls, but it is the likely scenario right now. I think if they took a poll now, I think you'd find a dead heat or Blake Masters slightly ahead. Dr. Oz just destroyed Fetterman in the debate. Fetterman just looked as bad as could possibly look. I think that with a win, well, first off, if Oz wins in Pennsylvania, that locks the Senate down, because that is the one seat that is up in the air as far as whether or not the Republicans hold a seat that they already have. So if the Republicans lost Pennsylvania, then now they have to win 2 seats to get the majority. So if they hold Pennsylvania, which it looks like Oz is probably going to start to pull away now, and I think he wins pretty solidly. He does that. The Democrats then, best they can probably do, likely, is they would have to win. They'd have to run the table in order to just to break even and end up with the 50-50 split that we have now. North Carolina looks like Republicans are going to hold. Looks like they're going to hold. Wisconsin, J.D. Vance looks solid. In Ohio, they should hold that. So this is about as good as it ever could have gotten in this cycle for Republicans. I always thought that the Republicans did a poor job of selecting their candidates and things should have been a little easier. But we are talking about a beatdown in the Senate that is going to be resounding. And there's an outside chance that things can get even better. New Hampshire, General Dan Bolduc is surging. I mean, he has a chance to win that. He would have to catch some of this red wave. Out in Colorado, O'Day, he's still in. He fell off a little in the past week or two. And so he has some work to do if he wants to make a run for it. Out in Washington, Tiffany Smiley is hanging in there. She could put that Senate seat in play when all is said and done. Remember, we're looking at trends at this point because we're still a couple weeks out. All of these races, with the exception, I think, of Colorado, O'Day did fall off, so I wouldn't say he's trending in the right direction, but everybody else is trending towards closing the gaps. So you never know if things really surge and the Republicans get their act together and push forward. It is possible that another one or two of these seats could be in play. It could get as high as 54 or 55 seats. I doubt it, but 53 will do. 53 will definitely do. And things in the governor's races are even more interesting than that. And I would say, to my way of thinking, amusing, because we're talking about serious Democrat seats that are in play. And the reason that the governor's races are important is because this is where a state can stand up and assert themselves in the face over say 2 years of a Joe Biden presidency, where he's got nothing available to him, no paths to getting his legislation passed in Congress. Once the Democrats lose power, he'll be in gridlock in Congress, which is what we want right now. And then all he'll have is executive orders and these agencies to kind of inflict his agenda kind of by fiat. And so where governors like a Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott down in Texas, who was just destroying Beto, he is those two guys down there have done a great job. Obviously, Ron DeSantis is the gold standard for Republican governors now. He's showing how powerful a governor really can be. Folks, I'll tell you what, Minnesota's in play. We'll get right into this. Trafalgar Group has Jensen up 1 over incumbent Governor Tim Walz. Now, lately, Minnesota has been a pretty solid blue state. So this is super encouraging trend to see in blue states. I just mentioned Greg Abbott. He's looking at a possible double-digit win over Beto. The most important issue there, what else would it be in Texas? Illegal immigration by 18 points, over even the economy, which is really leading the rest of the country in terms of importance. Mentioned DeSantis. He's out to an 11-point lead over Charlie Crist, and he annihilated Crist, I think it was last night in the debate. He's got it to where Crist is actually starting to sound somewhat like a Republican. Now, you remember he used to be a Republican before he was an independent, and then before he was a Democrat. So, but anyway, Chris is in such bad shape. This could end up being the biggest win for a governor in Florida in the modern age. The interesting thing about Ron DeSantis is that he also leads Joe Biden in a theoretical matchup, 48-42, while Trump only leads Biden 45-41. Now, this is in Florida. It's a theoretical matchup in Florida. So DeSantis has now surpassed Donald Trump in the state of Florida in terms of popularity when we're discussing the potential run for president. Out in Oregon, Christine Drazan is now the favorite to win over Tina Kotek. Anybody who's had a conversation with her, I really wish that I had this show a month or two ago, because Christine Drazan was a favorite of mine. I saw her do a couple of interviews, and I just had a feeling about basically just the way that race was looking and the way things were trending early on, that she was going to close the gap. And I figured maybe just put a scare into the Democrats and cause them to put some money into the state. Now she's the favorite to win over Tina Kotek, who is the incumbent. Out in Arizona, Kari Lake is looking really strong against Katie Hobbs, who, in a bizarre twist, has decided she's not going to debate. She's refusing to debate even one time. Kari is an expert in front of the media. She used to be, I believe, a journalist. She's had some media experience. And what she has decided to do is to have a camera crew follow her around. This is very Trumpian kind of thing to do. Have a camera crew, her own crew, that she pays, follows her around, and basically ensures the media can't get away with misquoting her. So last week she responded to the media and Democrats calling her an election denier because she questions how the 2020 election was running in certain parts of the country, including her own state. And she gives a master class on how to deal with these kind of accusations. Listen to this.
The question is, over the weekend, you took the Google all over the world. Your name was ringing everywhere. And one of them, yes, ma'am, because I have the scale. And one of them has, and most of them were asking, is she an election denier, Carrie Lake? And that was like going around on all different cable news. What do you elaborate on this?
I'm actually shocked you asked that question, George.
Well,
actually, Anthony, where's Anthony?
Once in a while.
Here, Anthony. You know, I did a little, actually, Anthony, how old are you?
20.
Are you a journalist?
No.
Well, you did better research than half these people. Let's talk about election deniers. Here's 150 examples of Democrats denying election results. Oh, wow, look at this. This is from Joe Biden's press secretary. Reminder, Brian Kemp stole the gubernatorial election from Georgians and Stacey Abrams. Democrats saying that. Is that an election denier? Oh, look at this. Just heard Republican Ryan Costello said it would be difficult for Stacey Abrams to win because she lost her state bid, but yet she's still claiming she never lost. This is outrageous. Hillary Clinton. Trump is an illegitimate president. Is she an election denier? This one says, was the 2016 election legitimate? It now definitely is a question worth asking. That's the Los Angeles Times. So it's okay for Democrats to question elections, but it's not okay for Republicans. It's a crock of BS. Every one of you knows it. We have our freedom of speech, and we're not going to relinquish it to a bunch of fake news propagandists. If you want a copy of these, I'm sure that Anthony would help you get a copy and help you learn how to be journalists, but look it up. It's been happening for a long time. Since 2000, people have questioned the legitimacy of our elections. And all we're asking is that in the future, we don't have that have to happen anymore. When I'm governor, we're going to make sure we have honest elections. We want the Democrats, the independents, and the Republicans to all know that their vote counted. We want fair, honest, and transparent elections, and we're going to deliver that for the people. But just remember, guys, this is one page after Hillary Clinton says George W. Bush was selected president, not elected. So let's start, if you're going to start throwing around terms like election denier, let's remember who the other election deniers were, Hillary Clinton and all the Democrats. Next question.
Folks, if you want to know how to do it, I think you should go on to YouTube and find that clip. Carrie Lake just manhandled these journalists. It is exactly how they need to be handled. They throw January 6th in your face. You throw Black Lives Matter and Antifa back in their face. They want to question, call you election deniers. You throw the Democrats for the past 2 decades. Every election they lose, they refuse to concede. They refuse to admit they lost. They accuse the Republicans of conspiring with the Russians or whatever. That's how you do it. You just shove it right back at them, and that is the only way you can defeat it. And the other thing is the camera crew. I'm not sure why I assumed Republicans had already learned this, because it's something I would have at least always had an audio recording of every interaction. She has her own camera crew following around to ensure the media can't pull her quotes out of context without her being able to respond with the full audio, and catch them in their lie and in their mishandling of the quote, their editing, selective editing and so forth. So for whatever reason, I thought Trump had already taught us all this, never to be caught without our own recordings of the media and whatever. But I guess Carrie Lake she's the only one to have actually learned that lesson, and she's out there crushing it. And now they're in a position, where if they want to quote her, they got to keep her in context because she'll humiliate them with the actual audio. New York, I'm almost embarrassed to even suggest that this is possible. But in New York, in a stunning turn of events, Lee Zeldin, Republican, he has a legitimate opportunity to unseat Kathy Hochul for the governorship there. This is a deep blue state. Republicans cannot win. national elections in New York. But Lee Zeldin is right at the gate, and there are people who larger voices than mine in conservative media who think he's going to win, who have already made that prediction. So I'm not sure that I can say he's gonna win, but I'll tell you what, if I had to guess, I think he has got a better than average chance of pulling it out. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed Tudor Dixon. This is the Michigan governor's race. She seemed to be closing a lot faster than I ever thought on the Wicked Witch of the Midwest, Gretchen Whitmer. If you don't remember Gretchen Whitmer, she was just a tyrant during the COVID lockdowns, and she became one of the most unpopular people in the country, earning her the nickname the Wicked Witch of the Midwest. And I think the CDC may have given her may have given Tudor Dixon a gift that'll pull her across the finish line. The CDC voted unanimously to add the COVID vaccine, to the schedule of vaccines required for children to attend public schools. And this was Dixon's response. Tudor Dixon said, a Dixon administration would fight this government overreach and move to ban Michigan schools from adding COVID-19 vaccines to the required list, Dixon said in a statement on Thursday. Liberal policymakers are pushing COVID-19 vaccines on our children and forcing parents out of the process, close quote. Now, the response to this from the CDC, our expert class, their response has been to say that they don't mandate anything, that they just make recommendations, but the decisions on how or what to implement lies with individual states. All right, well, fair enough, except that if you go back and you look at the states' responses to questioning, when we question lockdown, masking, vaccines, everything else related to the virus, they all defaulted to the CDC. All the CDC recommendations and guidelines. So it's not their fault because they're just following the CDC guidelines. But it's not the CDC's fault because they don't mandate anything. They just make recommendations and post guidelines. So the buck stops with no one. And it's one giant circular debate of passing the responsibility back and forth, and we just move on and on and on down to the next crisis. And Tucker Carlson had this to say on his show, and I think he is spot on.
In response to our segment, the CDC complained on Twitter. They claimed that states and not the CDC established vaccine requirements for school children. But like so much else that we have heard from the CDC, and it pains us to say this, but it's true. Like so much else they have told us over the last 2 years, they're lying. And they know they're lying. More than a dozen states follow the CDC's immunization schedule to set vaccination requirements, not suggestions, requirements for children to be educated. For example, the Virginia Department of Health states that, quote, vaccines must be administered in accordance with the CDC schedule. The state of Massachusetts says, quote, no student shall attend a preschool, elementary school, or secondary school program without a certificate of immunization documenting that a child has been successfully immunized in accordance with a schedule that was, quote, developed in accordance with the recommendations of the CDC's advisory panel. Tennessee says its immunization requirement, quote, follow the current schedule from the CDC. New Jersey, Vermont, Ohio say virtually the same thing. We could go on. The point is the CDC sets the standard, and then it becomes required across the country. And of course they know that. Of course they know that. If they know anything, they know that. So we called the CDC and asked a simple question. Do you deny that once the COVID vaccine is added to the childhood immunization schedule, many schools and states will require it based on your recommendation? And of course they know that's true. We caught them lying, so they didn't even bother to respond to us because apparently not American citizens and don't deserve a response.
And all of this has nothing to do with safety or protecting the children from a deadly virus, because all this is with the vaccine is to line the pockets of pharmaceutical execs, and then for the CDC heads who support this to get seats on advisory boards of these pharmaceutical companies, where they'll get to partake in the profits to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And that's just the way it works with this stuff. But the voters seem to be getting the message out there in Michigan because Real Clear Politics is now showing Tudor Dixon in the lead. She's now favored to win the governorship of Michigan. So, and why? Why? Part of the reason may be this ridiculous vaccine mandate that isn't really a mandate but actually is. Parents, whether it be Republican, Democrat, or independent, haven't taken their kids to get the vaccine. Only 5% of children under the age of 6 have gotten the vaccine. That means the hesitancy crosses all political lines. And obviously parents are going to be far more willing to take risks with their own body than they will with their kids. That's just natural. You know, I may be willing to take the vaccine if it's a matter of me working or getting on a plane and things that I need to do in my life. But there's no chance that I'm going to have them test their vaccines out on my children when I don't even know if they're effective, and I don't know what's going to happen to my children down the line as a result. So even for those who are pro-choice and pro-Democrat agenda, they may be swayed by the risk the Democrat Party presents to their children. And it's evident in the way a lot of these elections are shaping up. And it's not just about the vaccines either. Here's a father from Dearborn, Michigan, who showed up at his local school board to protest the LGBTQ plus up arrow, percentage sign, pound sign, dollar sign, ampersand, pornographic books that are being used in their children's schools.
Last month, I came to the board meeting for the first time in my life, and we read some of the material that was in these so-called books. The Great Sex App Debate. There's actual reviews about Grindr saying how good it is. I have used Grindr. The advantages are you can get what you want quickly. This is from the book. I've met a variety of interesting people through sex apps. They're predominantly used for sex, though. They're sold to us as social networking apps, but we all know what they're really for. I don't have a problem with that aspect of it. If people want casual sex, then something like Grindr is a must. And we read that to you last month, and you looked at us like we were some kind of crazy people speaking to you, like almost like we had nothing to like we had nothing to say. Now, does anybody need a college education or a PhD to know that this book is not appropriate for kids?
No. I don't think it can be any clearer or more obvious. I think a high percentage of Democrat moms and dads, like this guy probably is. He's in Michigan. Dearborn, Michigan is one of the most Democrat cities in the country. But I think some of these Democrat parents, they're not going to admit it to the pollsters. They won't even probably admit it to friends and family. But push comes to shove, now that their kids are being threatened, they're being threatened on the vaccine front, they're being threatened with this LGBTQ nonsense. It's a snowball effect. It's an avalanche of crazy leftist lunacy that I think is going to turn a few of them to the Republican side. And I think that's all Tudor Dixon needs in Michigan. It's just a little bit of help from some of these Democrat moms and dads. Crime is an ever-growing issue in states like New York, Minnesota, Oregon, a lot of these other blue-run states that have big cities. Democrats think they found a chink in the armor of Republicans who are running. They think they found a chink in the armor of Republicans who run on the issue of high crime in blue states. There's very specific crime data from the CDC and the FBI, which shows that red states have a higher crime rate than blue states. All right, and to fill us in on the facts here, we turn to Rhodes scholars Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. Check this out.
Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt interrupted her twice, saying it wasn't true in that demeaning and condescending way. But as you said, Joe, Hoffmeister is right. He's wrong. According to the CDC, Oklahoma has a homicide rate of 9 deaths per 100,000 people, compared with California's rate of 6.1 and New York's rate of 4.7.
So Oklahoma's rate for homicide is twice that per capita as New York.
And based on the FBI's 2022 crime report, Oklahoma recorded nearly 15,700 violent crimes. That's 393 for every 100,000 people. Oklahoma also has the 10th highest violent crime rate in the U.S. among states reported.
This morning before I came on the show, because I've been hearing this so much, you also hear from progressives that crime is actually worse per capita in red state America, in states that voted for Donald Trump. So I actually tweeted out a study this morning, and I said, this study claims that crime's the highest in 8 of the 10 states where it's the highest. They're red states that voted for Donald Trump. Jacksonville had a higher rise of murders than San Francisco.
Well, there you have it, folks. The numbers don't lie, right? I mean, obviously, common sense tells you that red states would have a higher crime rate than blue states, Actually, common sense tells you there's a little more to the story than simply that broad data. First off, does anybody really believe that the crime rates are higher in red states than blue states? Well, I guess you can't deny if the facts are the facts. If they're putting out numbers, if the FBI is putting out the numbers that the crime rates are higher in Oklahoma than in L.A. or New York or I'm sorry, than California, New York, or Illinois, maybe there's a little more to the story than simply red state, blue state. I guess that's a better way of putting it. I mean, would you expect crime in places like New York City, LA, or Chicago, as opposed to like rural Tennessee, rural Texas, or Idaho? So how is it possible? I guess this is the question here. How is it possible that the red states are showing these higher crime rates? All right. Well, it's actually not that complicated, because first off, let's just think about what makes a state a state. Well, what makes a red state a red state, or a blue state. So generally, the way we look at that is how the states vote in national elections. If a state like Florida tends to vote Republican, Ohio tends to vote Republican, while California, New York, Illinois all tend to vote Democrat. Sometimes it's got to do with the state governor and the state legislature. Every now and then you'll get a state with a Republican governor, like a New Jersey, votes almost fully, at least since like Reagan, New Jersey has voted for Democrat presidential candidates. But we've had a couple, 2, 3 Republican governors in the last 30 or 40 years. So red state, blue state is part of the story. But if a state votes Republican for president, has a Republican governor, and you consider that a red state, you have to remember that within each state, we have these things called cities. All right, and most states have at least one major city. And who generally runs cities, particularly the larger cities, the major cities? Democrats. So even in deep red states where statewide elections always go for Republican, the inner cities, which are often low income, minority, and which have disproportionately higher crime in those inner cities as compared to the surrounding suburbs and the rural areas, they're all run by Democrats. All of them. Every one of them. So yes, technically, a state with a Republican governor and even with a Republican state legislature can still have a high crime rate, because a disproportionate amount of crime comes out of these larger cities. For example, Kansas City, Missouri, very high crime rate. Little Rock, Arkansas, very high crime rate. Jackson, Mississippi, Shreveport, Louisiana, they're all red states, but they're all red state with these cities. All of these cities are red state cities, but the cities themselves are all run by Democrats, and the mayors and city councils in places like that have far more of a direct impact on their crime rates than the state governors. Okay, and this is a great example of why Americans don't trust the media, because they're liars. And when they're not lying to you, they're presenting data in a way that they might as well be lying to you. So anyway, it looks like a red wave is building, and if it keeps going in this trajectory, I think it's going to build into a possible tsunami. Now, this isn't the time to get overconfident, arrogant, or cocky, but it is the time to get everyone out to vote. This is one of these things where you need to make this soon. If it's going to be a tsunami, you want it to be as monstrous as possible. This is a time to send the message as loudly and clearly as possible. The Republicans need to make sure there is no doubt, not only Will that protect against fraud and election rigging by the media? But it'll mean that the Biden administration will be incapacitated. And at this point, gridlock sounds pretty good to me. So stopping his agenda is got to be first priority. All right, so I think we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to move on subjects and get off the elections and into something a little more, I wouldn't say a little more interesting, but something just as interesting, equally as interesting as the elections, but something that'll kind of be a little more educational for us. So I'll be right back. When things fade back, we'll be on a new subject. Don't forget to leave a comment in the comment section. Hit the button, the subscribe button. I need subscribers. I'll explain this at another point, but subscribers are important right now. We need to get that first 50 subscribers. That opens up some options for me as far as being able to post additional videos and add things like kind of on the fly that I'd love to be able to do when things kind of just pop into my mind to talk about. So yeah, definitely hit the subscribe button. Definitely leave a comment. Hit that notifications bell so that you know when I go live. Again, hopefully I'll be posting more and more throughout the week, not just doing this show every Wednesday. Also remember the email address for the show is chrismerlinoshow@gmail.com. And feel free to call in 609-798-4475. I'll let you know next segment when I come back in. The phone lines will be open. And again, we are the Chris Merlino Show through Intel Studios, and you can check us out at intel-studios.com. We'll be right back.
Hey gang, Chris Merlino here. I just want to take a minute to talk about how important it is for freedom-loving Americans to support the men and women who have sacrificed so much for this nation. Our veterans have put their lives on the line all over the world, and when they come home, they deserve to be welcomed, respected, and taken care of. Veterans advocate Mike Merlino, along with everyone else here at Intel Studios, is committed to supporting our vets. Be sure to check out Veterans Matter every Saturday afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. as Mike talks about the issues most important to our vets. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to support the show and to keep yourself updated whenever Mike goes live. Thanks, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday for the Veterans Matter live stream with Mike Merlino.
Sister, something cute in her braces and boots, and I had one green Santa hat.
And we are back with the Chris Merlino Show through Intel Studios here in Northfield, New Jersey. Again, the phone number 609-798-4475 if you want to be on the program. You could also send me an email at Chris Merlino Show. That's CHRISMERLINO show, SHOW at gmail.com. And if you send an email that is sufficiently semi-fascist, then I'm going to read it on the air, and the FBI will probably show up at your house, drag you away with a SWAT team, and stick you in with the rest of the January 6th election deniers. In the meantime, we are going to switch it up here a little bit. What I want to talk about now, because this is an issue that comes up all the time. It was really no better emphasized than during this whole COVID response. And I want to start by posing a question to you, and it's a question that I think Trump asked in his way, and I think it gets to the heart of what Republicans need to consider, particularly when they take power like they're about to, but even more so when they take enough power to actually accomplish something. So we'll get into that. But what I want to ask you is this question: who do you think runs this nation's government? It's supposed to be run by our elected representatives, by the president, by Congress, by Senate. But really, if you think about it, outside of spending money, what has Congress really done? Or I guess a better question would be, when was the last time Congress actually did something important outside of simply spending money? So if you think about it, all that money doesn't simply get spent when they pass a spending bill. It gets divvied up among the countless bureaucracies within the executive branch of the government. So technically, these agents are accountable to the president. They work for the president, and then also to Congress via congressional oversight. So Congress gives the power to these agencies. The president's supposed to run the agencies, and then Congress is supposed to oversee that to ensure that they are putting a check on the president and his branch. But Congress, over the past 50 years or so, spent a lot of that time pushing its authority off onto these bureaucracies, who in turn are the ones that create rules and regulations, like fines and fees and penalties and so forth. And when you think about the pandemic, the government response to it more than the pandemic itself. Can you think of any law that Congress actually put into effect as a result of the pandemic? Remember, we're made to lock down, mask up, get vaccinated. Air travel became a complete nightmare because of regulations. Schools and businesses were shut down. Even churches were forced to keep their doors closed. And to the extent that any of that was legal to force Americans to do, to the extent any of that was legal, the Constitution has vested Congress, to some extent the President, the United States, with that authority. It says nothing about unelected bureaucrats who are not accountable to the people of the nation. While we sit here arguing about elections and the impact that the president has on the nation, how important it is to put Republicans or Democrats into office, thousands and thousands of nameless bureaucrats and faceless bureaucrats are working tirelessly to implement leftist policies. Now, this happens even when Republicans are in power. And you just asked Donald Trump. And if you were watching and paying attention, it seemed as though half the government was arrayed against him, and the other half was silently, quietly working in the background against him. It just seemed like everything was against him. And even though it was technically his administration and they all worked for him, none of them seemed to be on his side. Certainly none of them were doing his bidding. They were doing the bidding of the media and the left. You want a real-world example of how deep the expert mentality runs in our government, you just have to look at the COVID response. And that was the most recent and the most, really, in my in my opinion, the most egregious. Because remember, all the problems that the media or the politicians blame on COVID, it actually has nothing to do with COVID. The virus didn't do anything. It was our response to the pandemic that caused all of the problems. And if you remember, it was all about the science. It was all about keeping people safe. But tell me, what was the science behind masking on airplanes? Scientifically, listen to me. Scientifically, one of the safest places to be during the COVID pandemic was on an airplane. And why? Because airplanes have extraordinary HEPA filtration, excellent air circulation. They have to. That you got hundreds of people jammed together in tight confines. In the best of circumstances, it can get pretty uncomfortable. And one thing you really need in a confined space like that is really good circulation and filtration. And that's why you've never heard not a single time of a single incident where an airplane flight was a spreader event. Remember, they were talking about super spreader events. If people got together, congregated in large numbers, it turned into a super spreader event. But you never heard of that on an airplane. The virus has spread any number of ways, irrespective of whether people wore masks or locked down. We all got it, like the flu. Sooner or later, we all got COVID. And if you haven't yet, you will. But you won't get it on an airplane, mask or no mask. It just won't happen. And yet airplanes were the most heavily regulated part of American life. Why? Because it was one of the few areas where the federal government could control. It was, and the federal government is populated with experts, all intent on control. Follow the science, follow the data. These were Dr. Fauci's mantras throughout the pandemic response. And here he is talking to Chuck Todd about it a year ago.
He should be fired because he, in the beginning, changed his mind about masks. Well, okay, so let's go back early on with the masks, and let's take a look at that. At the time that we were saying we shouldn't be wearing a mask, there were three factors that were going on. A, there was thought to be a shortage of masks. B, there was no evidence that masks worked outside of the context of a hospital. I wear a mask when I'm seeing patients with respiratory disease that could be transmissible like tuberculosis, a well-fitted N95. Thirdly, we were not aware of the extent of asymptomatic spread. So we said you don't really need to wear a mask. It wasn't only me. I'm picked out as the villain. It was the Surgeon General of the United States and the entire CDC was saying the same thing. So as we went from January, February, March, April, it became clear that those three things, A, there was no shortage and you could wear a cloth mask. B, the data showed that in fact, outside of the hospital setting, masks do work. And third, to our painful awareness, it became clear that 50% or more of the transmissions were with people who had no symptoms. So that's when we said, we've got to get people to wear masks.
So Fauci, first, you're not supposed to wear a mask. Then you are supposed to wear a mask. Then you're not supposed to wear a mask. Then you should wear two masks. The thing about this isn't just getting it wrong. Because you can get things wrong. And look, let's just face it, the experts do nothing if they don't get everything wrong. But the problem is the lie. And it's even for a good reason, or what he thinks is a good reason. He thinks that we're just going to accept that he lied to us about in the very beginning of that when he said that we don't need to wear masks. And his explanation for that was because he was afraid of a shortage of masks for hospital professionals and so forth. Well, you don't get to have it both. You don't get to tell a lie, get caught in the lie, and then have us just believe the next thing you tell us. And the problem with the mask thing is that it's just not even reasonable to tell us that these masks actually work. There's no evidence that they work. We'll get into that. He went on and talked about the scientific process. Here's Fauci talking about scientific process.
That's what's called, Chuck, the scientific process. You make a recommendation, an opinion, and a guideline based on what you know at a given time. As a scientist, as a health official, when those data change, when you get more information, it's essential that you change your position, because you've got to be guided by the science and the current data. That issue with masks is people want to fire me or put me in jail for what I've done, namely follow the science.
Yeah, fine. But the problem is he never showed us the data. He never presented his case to the American people. He just said the data this and the data says that, and we're just supposed to accept it. Well, it doesn't work that way, doctor. In America, you show your work, especially when what you're saying makes no sense and you want us to upend our lives and our lifestyles and our children's lives as well. Mask science, all right? You want to know about mask science? Very little has changed in mask science in the past 100 years. All right, we know how to filter out everything from dust to paint to viruses. Okay, what we know scientifically is that cloth masks, which are nothing more than a t-shirt over your mouth and nose, are in no way effective at stopping an airborne virus. Now, if they have studies showing that I'm wrong, that that's an incorrect thing, that a mask can stop a virus, well, they've yet to show it. All right, and until they do, until they demonstrate that we've been wrong about this for the last century, they can forget about me or anyone else with a shred of common sense believing them. Putting on a white lab coat is far less impressive these days than it used to be. And the reason is because the science is not being explained. There was a time when a scientist made a proclamation about this is the way it is, and then here's why. And we got to have it explained to us until we understand in terms that we could understand, and they made it make sense. And the science fails don't end. The science failed didn't end with masks. Okay, these experts forced us to stop living our normal lives for 2 years. Lockdowns. What was the lockdown benefit? Right, the benefit of lockdowns versus all the consequences of lockdowns. Okay, the idea of a lockdown may sound prudent in the face of a deadly virus. It might seem like a good idea to isolate people, get them off the streets and so forth, stop congregating. And there's some truth to not having large events where people are breathing and shouting and sweating all over each other, like a rock concert or a rally and so forth. There's some truth to not having people in proximity to each other that are exerting themselves. Makes sense. So it seems like but it ends with that. It might sound like a good idea to isolate everybody, get them all off the streets and so forth. But the thing that spreads a virus the fastest is when, forget about the large events, but also when people are just in normal proximity to one another for extended periods of time. If you think about the cycle of the flu in America, Florida's flu season is in the hotter months of the summer because people tend to go indoors and congregate due to the heat. They spend less time outside. It's the opposite in the north. In the winter, everybody goes inside because it's so cold outside. When people collect indoors, the virus is spread. Now, that's the way it is with the flu. And COVID spreads similar to the flu. Across the country, blue state Democrats shut down beaches, parks, hiking trails. Why? What was the science behind that? Where did they get the notion that shutting down outdoor activity made any sense at all? But beyond that, beyond the notion of keeping people separated and isolated to stop the spread, where is the science on isolating people? What are the consequences? The 2 years of viral hysteria and constant fear-mongering. What are the psychological effects on children who are still in various stages of development who they need to spend their time learning, socializing, playing, doing things that kids do. Because I can tell you, it doesn't take a deep dive to discover that during the COVID lockdown and ensuing hysteria, suicides, domestic abuse, alcoholism, drug overdoses, crime, basically every bad thing in society, they all increased during the COVID lunacy. And the so-called experts can't point to a single life that was saved as a result of their policies. States who locked down the hardest often did worse than those who didn't. You look at Florida, a state with the highest percentage of elderly, who were the most at-risk demographic for COVID. Florida was the middle of the pack when it came to COVID outcomes. And they never locked down, or at least they locked down very, very briefly and opened right back up. So they should have, but by the experts' predictions, Florida should have been a gravesite, a mass a wasteland of death and torment. But nothing like that ever happened. Why? Who was really following the science? We know it wasn't the Democrats, because the blue state Democrats simply failed. They failed to protect the most vulnerable, just like Ron DeSantis did in Florida. While he did open up, he directed his resources to protecting the elderly, isolating people in assisted living facilities, people that were sick. He didn't send them back into these assisted facilities where there was a bunch of other vulnerable people. He kept them isolated, did what he could to protect it. He directed the things like therapeutic medications and so forth towards those at-risk people first. And that did save a lot of lives. That's clearly saved a lot of lives. And we knew almost from the very beginning, we knew two things about the COVID virus. Here's something that I certainly knew it, and I remember having these conversations with my family, my friends, people I worked with. We knew from the very beginning two things. One, it was more severe in elderly patients and those who had pre-existing conditions such as heart and respiratory issues. The obese were at risk, mainly due to their propensity to have heart conditions and diabetes and so forth. The second thing we knew very early was that children were at vanishingly low risk, both for infection and for spread. So why did so many blue state governors return COVID positive patients to places like assisted living facilities, where those who are at the greatest risk were all living? Why were they so focused on closing schools where children who are at such low risk really needed to be, and which would have at least salvaged something good out of the whole situation? What were we protecting the kids from anyway? They had very low risk of actually acquiring the disease, but even if they got it, they were at almost zero risk from serious illness or death. So they were protected from what? A cold? These kids are forced to wear, little kids, 2 years old, 3 years old, forced to wear cloth masks on their faces, even though the entire world knows that the masks are ineffective at stopping the spread of virus. It's pure child abuse. These silly acrylic panels they put up dividing the students made the schools look like they were in little isolation bubbles. And what's an acrylic panel in the middle of the room with open air all around it going to do to stop the spread of a virus? Are kids really just spitting at each other and sneezing on each other across from desk to desk? Is that really what's going on? Drugs like hydroxychloroquine, which Trump took, were demonized to the point that hospitals and doctors were threatened that if they prescribed them, they would risk losing their medical licenses. Places like CVS and Walgreens, they wouldn't even fill the prescriptions even if you got a doctor to write one. Imagine doctors, the true experts, right, were being told by government bureaucrats they're not allowed to prescribe drugs to sick people or at-risk people. When someone did get these life-saving drugs and publicly said they were taking them, the media ridiculed them. My favorite example of this, and you may have seen this, was the little feud that erupted between Joe Rogan and CNN. The basic background is Joe Rogan contracted COVID, and he went to his doctor who prescribed him a few different drugs, including a drug called ivermectin. It's a drug for which its creator was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2015, which is also used in certain veterinary applications. Most drugs are like that. They have multiple uses across human and animal applications. So Rogan came out, he posted a video where he explained, he's got COVID, and he's taking these drugs. And then he told everybody what he was taking, the actual drugs he was taking. And CNN, for whatever reason, in an effort to ridicule him and I guess discredit the use of ivermectin, went out and their whole crew essentially said that Joe Rogan was taking horse dewormer and that no one should do this because it was dangerous. And they're laughing and making fun of him and all that. And Rogan took the drugs, he got better in a day or two, was back on the air. Within less than a week, he was back to full strength. And sometime after that, he had Sanjay Gupta on. And here was their hilarious exchange.
The rest of them are all lying about me taking horse medication. We should talk about that. That bothered you. It should bother you, too. They're lying at your network about people taking human drugs versus drugs from veterinary. Calling it a horse dewormer is not a flattering thing. I get that. It's a lie. It's a lie on a news network, and it's a lie that's a willing... That's a lie that they're conscious of. It's not a mistake. Yeah. They're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine.
Rogan's spot on there. CNN was lying, and they knew they were lying. Every single one of them. And what he said was exactly right, and that's what was going on. They were framing reality in such a way as to misinform their audience. And Gupta sitting there with no other pass but to try to obfuscate and kind of play both sides against the middle. Their conversation continued, and it didn't get any better for Gupta.
Not just could be used for humans, is often used for humans along with all the other drugs I took, all human drugs. Yes. They know it's a human drug. It's right. And they lied. The thing it's defamatory. It is they shouldn't have done that. It's defamatory, right? Well, I don't know if it's defamatory. I bet it is. I'm not a lawyer. It's a lie. Well, see, here's the thing. You can have nuanced discussions about this. No, right? You can't. Yeah, you can't have nuanced discussions about lying about someone taking horse dewormer.
I love Gupta trying to say there's nuance. And Rogan is I haven't spent a whole lot of time listening to his podcast, but one thing about him is he is a great interviewer, and he has a way of just in a I don't even know how you would say, just in a kind way, in a gentle way, but still powering through. He has a way of making sure that point gets across. Gupta said there's nuance. No, there's no nuance. There's no nuance. CNN is populated by leftist liars and nothing more. They're nothing more than that. They're not journalists. And here's the last of the conversation.
Yeah, they're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine. Well, the FDA put this thing out. You saw that. Did you see that thing that the FDA put out? What did the FDA put out? It was a tweet, and it was snarky. I admit it. They said, you are not a horse, you are not a cow, stop taking this stuff, or something like that. Why would you say that when you're talking about a drug that's been given out to billions and billions of people, a drug that was responsible for one of the inventors of it making the Nobel Prize in 2015? Yeah. Yeah, a drug that has been shown to stop viral replication in vitro. You know that, right? Why would they lie and say that's horse dewormer? I can afford people medicine, This is ridiculous. It's just a lie. I don't think anyone is thinking. But don't you think that a lie like that is dangerous on a news network when you know that they know they're lying? You know that they know that I took medicine. Like, here it is.
And Rogan gets to the heart of the issue right at the end there. It's not just that they're liars, and it's not just that they're partisan hacks. It's that they're setting a dangerous precedent because people listen to them. Well, it's CNN. I mean, idiots listen to them, and they go around repeating this nonsense. Those people really think, guys like Brian Stelter and Don Lemon, some of these people really think those two nitwits are intelligent. They're not. They're morons. And more importantly, they're bought and paid for by those who have a financial or political interest in creating a narrative. The vaccine was you want to talk about narrative creating? The vaccine was lies upon lies upon lies about how effective they were at immunizing people, about how effective they were at stopping the spread. Here's a couple of clips right in a row here. Dr. Monica Gandhi from USCF, about the vaccine, and then following her, I'm going to go right into it. Rachel Walensky about vaccine effectiveness. So here's Monica Gandhi.
Essentially, vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
UCSF infectious disease specialist Dr. Monica Gandhi says this new information is significant.
You can feel safe as a vaccinated person going indoor dining, going to a gym, going to the movies.
How long did that last? I mean, it was you were supposed to get the vaccine, and that was it. That was their first lie. And they had to know it was a lie because they didn't do the proper testing, which we're going to get to. But here's Rachel Walensky with a similar
Our
lie.
data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real world data.
I don't know. I shouldn't have done. I don't know why I did this to myself, because it had me so pissed back then, and now reliving it gets me even more aggravated. These people, whatever. Dr. Asim Malhotra went on the Laura Ingraham show. This is around the same time. Said this about the CDC just this past, I think it was this past week or last week, voting unanimously. So the CDC decided to get together. We're in the middle of an election season. I don't know what possessed them to do this. I mentioned this a little bit back in we were talking about the elections, but the CDC voted unanimously. I think it was a 15-0 vote to add the COVID vaccine to the schedule of childhood vaccines. All right, so I'm going to talk about this ruling in a minute, but here's what the doctor's opinion. She went on Laura Ingraham.
Myocarditis is one issue. The other very good, clear data actually reveals that in people aged between 16 and 39, Israel data showed this, there was a 25% absolute increase in heart attacks and cardiac arrest, which was associated with the vaccine, but not associated with COVID. This has now been replicated in Florida, similar type of findings recently, and that's why the general surgeon of Florida has come out and suggested that certainly people in that age group shouldn't be having the vaccine. But I've looked at that data, I've spoken to the researchers in Israel, and in fact, this signal of harm is for everybody, even people over the age of 60, not to that degree.
Well, doctor, let me jump in here and just very quickly. Given what we know thus far, was this vaccine rolled out too quickly without adequate testing because of the global pandemic nature of things?
I think yes, but Laura, I find it very difficult to believe that Pfizer senior executives and Pfizer scientists didn't know when it was being rolled out, because they have access to the raw data, which we now know shows significant harm. It's likely they knew this, which means that I don't think it probably, with hindsight, and I'm sure an investigation will reveal this eventually, it probably should never have been rolled out in the first place.
These people suck. That's what it is. They just suck. This is a disgusting thing to have happened. You think you're supporting people who have your best interests at heart, who are just trying to help, and they move in ways and then do. Man, I can barely think straight some of the time. They roll this vaccine out, and they didn't test it properly, and yet I can live with the failure of the vaccine. I understand, because even at the time that the vaccine was released, I thought, man, I don't know, I'm not an expert in this, but, it was faster than normal. There's a reason that vaccines and all medication take a long time to go through the process, and sometimes we think it's a cumbersome, unnecessary process, but there's a reason for it. But if you're going to roll it out fast and come out so strongly that it's effective and all that, and then try to get it mandated, and then only to find out that you did very little testing and that it's not effective at all. It's an infuriating thing. I'm going to play one more clip, and then I want to leave this for another time. This is the Pfizer exec. This is somebody who was involved from the minute that this all started. Listen to what this exec said about the testing.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping humanisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk.
The speed of science. What does that mean? Do you know what that means? These people think that when they talk like this, that it makes sense, or that we won't pay attention to the substance of what they're saying. You know, the fact is science moves slowly. That's what the process is, how the process is designed. The idea is to get it right, not to score political points or move an agenda forward. And if you're not doing that, if you're not ensuring accuracy and right results, you're not a scientist, no matter what Ivy League letters you write after your name. Anyway, I'm going to take another break. I've realized how late this is getting. And then I'm going to move on. I got plenty more on this, so this is something I'm going to come back to. So I'll get to the rest of this at another time. But I'm going to take a break because I really want to get to some issues going on with the transgender debate and Biden. So I'm going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Hey folks, it's your beloved host, Chris Merlino, here to ask you if you remembered to click on the subscribe button and the notifications bell. The more subscribers we have, the better I'll feel about sitting here complaining for 2 hours every week instead of sitting home, sipping bourbon and watching Hulu. And if you click the notifications bell, you'll be alerted every time I go live to complain about how far we've fallen as a culture and how I wonder if there's any hope at all. And whether you join us live or catch the show later, don't forget to leave us a comment so we know you exist. And if your comment is sufficiently intelligent, we might even read it live on the air because, well, someone has to say something smart around here. Anyway, thanks for checking out the Chris Merlino Show.
Get away, just like the Queen did with McGraw when they were in that groovy film by Peckinpah. I wanna be the coolest man you've ever seen. I just wanna be your Steve McQueen. Can't you see the game we're gonna play? You're the prey. Black turtleneck is all I'll ever have to wear for you to say, let's start a Thomas Crown affair. I wanna be the coolest man you've ever seen. I just wanna be your Steve McQueen. Can't you see that I will set my lead if I you're Steve McQueen. 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 You're Steve McQueen.
And we are back with Chris Merlino's show here at Intel Studios in Northfield, New Jersey. Again, the number, if you want to be on the program, 609-798-4475. You can shoot me an email at chrismerlinoshow@gmail.com. So I wanted to get to this. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to get to the story, the tragic story of a young lady named Casey Miller. Casey, at the age of 16, made a decision to transition from a female to a male and began a 5-year journey that included hormone replacement, testosterone, and other drugs. Now she's ended up at a point where certainly others have and will continue to end up as we get deeper and deeper into this lunacy of sexually confusing children and convincing them that there's something wrong with their bodies, that if they just take these drugs and consent to these surgeries, that everything will work out fine for them. And remember, the people who are supposed to be advising these confused and vulnerable young children are also in a position to benefit financially from guiding them into these mutilations and drug therapies. Hospitals make thousands upon thousands of dollars, really tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for the surgeries alone. But even after the surgeries, these unsuspecting patients are then condemned to a lifetime of hospital visits and follow-up care because what has been done to them is, in fact, unnatural and harmful. And they're now lifetime patients because they need to continually be have things updated and fixed and adjusted. It means a constant flow of dollars to these hospitals and clinics. And that's what this is all really about, at least as far as the ghouls and goblins who perform these surgeries and prescribe these drugs that destroy the lives of these poor kids are concerned. As for the public face of the transgender movement, those are out front pushing this on society. We've talked about them before. Their entire concern is the validation of their choices. That's why they're focused on children, on younger and younger children who are not in a position to question the things they're being told and who wouldn't even know how to question it if they were. And Casey Miller is just the most recent of these victims. Here's the audio of her latest post.
So I got out of my haircut because my hair was driving me nuts, and I shaved it because I'm tired of watching my hair thin out, and it's less distressing if I shave it. So when I talk about being too far gone, I don't really know what else to call it. This is what I mean. This is how deep my voice is. It's gotten deeper over time, and it's settled. This is what I mean by hair loss. And it just keeps getting worse. It keeps thinning. It keeps receding backwards. And I'm not exactly sure that's coming back. Those are the main things when I talk about being androgenized to a point of no return. I really don't see those being fixable. So that's when I talk about, just kind of staying how I am, regardless of how I feel. That's why, just because I don't really see me personally being able to come back from what's happened so far. So I hope that's a little explanatory, just to kind of give a little bit more of a, just to kind of, talk about, give more awareness to the situation.
So that's her situation. There's no likely solution, nothing that can return her back to the way she was. She's trapped in a sort of in between no man's land, a realm where she's no longer the female she was supposed to become and not the male she had so wanted to become. Not that it was ever possible to become male. Of course, that is a pursuit that has always been impossible and ludicrous. And that's what makes what was done to her. And notice I said what was done to her, not what she did to herself. You'll never get me to say that about a child. These psychopathic cretins that foisted these drugs on her are the ones responsible for all of this. She was a child, a 16-year-old child. She was confused and struggling with the physical and emotional changes of adolescence. She felt as though her body didn't match up to with whatever was going on inside her. And now, as we see in the video, she's suffering the results. Her voice is deepened like an adolescent boy's. That is unlikely that could ever be reversed. Her hairline is receding. She has all the negative hallmarks of a 40-year-old man without any of the benefits. And she summed it all up perfectly when she says, this is what happens when you give a girl testosterone for 5 years. Now she's resigned to the fact that these results are irreversible. And all she seems to be trying to do now is to warn others that there are risks to these decisions. And you have to understand that boys and girls are different. I know that's a controversial statement these days, but girls' bodies are not meant to contain these levels of testosterone. They're simply not built for it. And whenever you try to force nature into some predetermined box you have in mind, it never works. It's always going to snap back. You can't alter the chemical makeup of a human being without unintended consequences. And even the intended consequences are not likely to match up to the ideals a 16-year-old kid has in his or her head. These kids who transition think they know what they're getting themselves into. They have an image in their head and they're working towards it. And they can do superficial things with clothes and makeup and hairstyles and all that, but their bodies, their physical bodies will never match the image because it can't. And rather than helping her sort through all the mental and emotional and even physical torment, these indescribably despicable people sank their fangs into her and condemned her to a life of just constant regret and sadness. You know, yeah, she can rise above it and lead a perfectly productive life and contribute to society. And hopefully she finds her way maybe to God and is able to bring some measure of peace and contentment to her life. But in any case, she won't be getting any help or encouragement from the trans community. Casey's posted videos describing her failed results. Rather than encourage her and try to help her through a difficult time in her life, the online trans community did what they always do, and which is to mock and scorn her. And you got to understand, they treat anyone who chooses to detransition like traitors who have left their religion. And make no mistake about that, the transgender movement and the gender movement at large is a religion or a cult, whatever. But it contains a strong religious element. There's no other way to look at it. And here's an example. A couple years ago in New Hampshire, someone named Aria DeMezzo, founder and high priest of the Reformed Satanic Church, ran for public office. An amusing side note was that she found a way somehow to run as a Republican after the actual Republican dropped out of the race. And how she managed to do that is beyond me, but it doesn't really matter. It's not really part of the story. But what matters is that she's a satanic high priest, and she's just an amusing example because she's also trans. And the fact is, the left has gone down this road of Satanism, and they've been at it for a very long time, going all the way back to at least the 60s, where the whole sexual revolution really got underway. Now, we hear this word that we throw around, Satanism, and it's come up lately, or satanic. And a lot of times we'll roll our eyes, shake our heads, immediately tune it out. And we think of Satanism as a bunch of people in black robes chanting in a candlelit room, worshiping the devil. But that's not what Satanism is. It's not what Satanism preaches. Put simply, Satanism is really just the worship of the self. You know, what did Lucifer do? He placed himself above God. Well, who hasn't done that? So when we say it's satanic, we're not talking about some mystical occult practice. Not necessarily. It's just the elevation of the self, the worship of the self, only in the extreme. And all you have to do to verify this is just look at the writings of actual Satanists, real Satanists like Anton LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible. He said the following. He said, "We don't worship Satan. We worship ourselves, using the metaphorical representation of the qualities of Satan. Satan is the name used by Judeo-Christians for that force of individuality and pride within us." He also said, Satanists are encouraged to indulge in the seven deadly sins, and that Satanism condones any type of sexual activity which properly satisfies your individual desires, be it heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or even asexual if you choose. Satanism also sanctions any fetish or deviation which will enhance your sex life. So you can see how insane the thought process is already. And when you add to that the notion of whatever you want to do and whatever you feel are right and good and true simply because you feel that way and you want it to be true, it's all a recipe for disaster. And when you add further the notion that anyone who opposes your ideas is to be treated with contempt and to be treated, and also a quote from LeVay, you are to treat people who annoy you, treat them cruelly and without mercy. It isn't hard to see how we've gotten to the point where those who want to detransition or those who do not support transgenderism get treated so harshly. One of the most popular activists opposing the transgender movement is Matt Walsh, and he made a documentary called What is a Woman, which is fantastic, absolutely exploded. It's caused a great deal of consternation among the LGBTQ community. And lately he's been going around to college campi and screening the documentary. Of course, LGBT activists always show up in an effort to disrupt the event. What they really want is to shut the event down. Sometimes they succeed, but Matt Walsh continues to push forward with his message, which is really little more than a simple question that has the left stumped, and they've not been able to successfully answer. And the question is very simply, what is a woman? On Monday, Matt showed up at the University of Wisconsin, and the protesters outside were filmed shredding pages of the Bible and eating them. And you can see these lunatic mutants with green and blue hair on YouTube if you want to go on there and just Google in, Matt Walsh, University of Wisconsin protesters. Now, I don't know what they think about Christians, but very few of us concern ourselves with what atheists choose to do with a Bible that they find. Sure, it's offensive and classless, but Christians don't usually get up in arms over things like that anymore, which is why the left feels free to desecrate the Bible. Try that with the Quran. Go ahead. The Muslim communities aren't into the whole LGBTQ thing either, folks. But these people would never offend Muslims the way they will Christians. Wonder why that is. Anyway, the protesters did have some things to say. As this young man who showed up with green hair and a bandana-style face mask, like some kind of a Joker train robber, he showed up to explain how Matt Walsh is a terrorist.
Hate women, hate children, hate trans, hate queer people. He's a far-right lunatic propagandist. If you support anything he says, you are indoctrinating everyone you know into being a Nazi. Matt Walsh is a stochastic terrorist.
You can almost see the spirals in his eyes as he recites his lines. I doubt he could even explain what a stochastic terrorist is, and that's because the term has no meaning other than someone who says something I don't like. But he was one of the more rational and respectful of the horde of low testosterone mosquitoes that showed up to make their voices heard. For example, take this guy, a white guy, screaming into a bullhorn pointed right into the face of a white woman who was standing there and smiling, holding up a sign.
White Panther! You ugly bitches! You look like the guy with teeth knocked out. Fascist! Nobody knows who you are and nobody cares, and you will die alone! You will die alone and you will burn in hell!
I have to hand it to woman there. If you see the video, you got to remember these people are not used to this. She's not there expecting to be confronted with a deranged androgynous mental case in a man bun screaming at her through a bullhorn. She's just a normal woman. She probably has kids, a family back home, and just wants to make sure politicians hear her voice and protect children. And I got to say, I'm not cut out to hold a sign at a protest and deal with something like that, because if a guy stuck a bullhorn in my face like that and screamed into it, he would end up staggering away with a bullhorn-style hat on his head. But think about what he said to her. No one knows who you are, and you will die alone. And they really think we don't know who they're actually talking to, because this is what these people must tell themselves every day. All of this is a projection. Remember, the right doesn't do this. We don't protest. We don't stand out in crowds and hold up signs. Other than the March for Life, there's no consistent protest. These things they rarely come together. And that's why it's such a big deal that they're happening now so often. This is why the Mutant Brigade is so up in arms. This is kind of a in the streets activism. That's their thing. It's their domain. They own the streets. The right doesn't get to do this without these people getting violent and profane and downright demonic. And if you think that that's too harsh a description, just check out what happened when the protesters ran out of barely coherent words. You got to admit, I mean, he articulates his side's points with about as much lucidity as any of the others we heard from. Dovetailing with this story is the story of Dylan Mulvaney. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dylan Mulvaney. He is about a year ago, he rose to prominence, about 10 months, I guess. He's a man who decided he was going to identify as a girl. And you can go online and check out his journey. He posted what he calls his Days of Girlhood, which catalogs his so-called transition. Now, he then amassed a following of over 8 million followers, and then Ulta Beauty decided that he was the perfect person to market beauty products to women. It's astounding that these people can do this with a straight face and then pretend to be angry with normal people when we don't react with awe and wonder at their brilliance. Well, Ulta's stupid move was met with extreme backlash. And I mean, what woman wouldn't want a man dressed in what can only be described as woman face telling them what it's like to be a woman and what beauty products are best suited to their needs and wants? Anyway, Dylan Mulvaney got invited to the White House, and the White House decided it's a good idea to sit this freak down with the President of the United States for an interview. Now, if you really want to know where the real privilege exists in this country, you just need to look no further than the trans movement. Look at how the trans movement steamrolls its way around the country. So Dylan Mulvaney gets to interview the president, and of course he wants to know if the president thinks states should have the right to ban the mutilation of children who are confused about their sexuality. And here's what the president had to say to him.
Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming health care?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong.
Is there some universe where this stance is going to help the Democrats in the midterms? I'm thinking this is exactly the message that I, as a staunch conservative, want the Democrats to be sending right now and on into November. Remember, we're talking about mutilating children. And what the President of the United States is saying here is that states don't have any right to weigh in at all. But hey, who am I to judge these professionals when it comes to convincing American voters to support them? Here's another exchange.
And it feels like Republicans have turned trans and non-binary people into this thing to blame society's downfall on in some ways. And this narrative is not only dangerous to our mental health, but also our physical safety. And particularly trans women of color are being murdered at an alarming rate.
More than any other group of people.
Thank you. How can Democratic leaders be more effective in advocating for us trans people and our families and our lives and our opportunities?
I'm not being facetious when I say this, being seen with people like you. I mean it. I genuinely mean it. People fear what they don't know. They fear what they don't know. And when people realize, individuals realize, oh, this is what they're telling me to be frightened of, this is the problem, people change their minds. People just don't know enough to know. And it's not because of intellectual incapability, it's just a lack of exposure. And I think that it's really important that we continue to speak out about the basic fundamental rights of all human beings. And the idea that what's going on, in some states, I won't get into the politics of it, but in some states, it's outrageous, and I think it's immoral. The trans part's not immoral. What they're trying to do to trans persons is immoral.
It's immoral not to mutilate and butcher children? Again, are we really expected to trust these people with our children? whether it be in the classroom or the doctor's office or even online. And the president blames it all on ignorance. But when we ask questions, we get shouted down. Matt Walsh just wants to know, what is a woman? We get cursed at, called bigots, transphobes, and racists. They always throw in racists. But these people don't want to answer our questions. They can't answer our questions because our questions call into existence their very sense of who they are, or the way as they always say it, their very existence. So they don't want to educate us, not really. What they want is our capitulation, our surrender. They want our validation because, as I said last show, they only find validation, true validation, in the heterosexual world. They can't find it amongst themselves. They need society at large to tell them they're okay. And then in a bizarre twist, the interview went in a different direction. He told interviewers that he got his student loan bailout passed by a vote of 2. Listen to this.
Secondly, if you don't have one of those loans, you just get $10,000 written off. It's passed. I got it passed by a vote or 2.
Mr. President, you didn't get that passed, at least not by any vote of Congress. That was just something you did all by yourself. The same way you mandated the vaccine, the same way you sicked your DOJ on parents who were protesting at school board meetings. You just did it by executive fiat, not by any democratic process. He went on answering other questions, making a complete fool of himself. And then he was asked this.
Do you support a federal fund for individuals like myself who need to take time off work, obtain child care?
The answer is absolutely. But guess what? We need the same votes we need to overrule to reinstate the decision that was struck down by the court. I mean, I do support that, and I've publicly urged companies to do that. I've urged them publicly as President of the United States, saying, this is what you should be doing. I urge you to do it.
I think that what he was trying to say was that he urged them. Yes, he urged private companies to pay for their female employees to kill their children over the weekend so they could get back to work on Monday. He urged them to do that. So this seems like the message Democrats want to carry into the midterms. If you've been taking notes, they have a 3-pronged approach. First, they want to make taxpayers fund women killing their children in the womb. Second, if any children do survive, they want to be able to butcher and mutilate them and keep the states from exercising any restraint whatsoever on it. Finally, if you disagree with any of the left's positions, you're a semi-fascist, ultra-right-wing, mega-MAGA white supremacist, and you should be excised from polite society, and even imprisoned if you refuse to get your mind right. So Americans are left with a stark contrast as the election season wraps up in 2 weeks. And if Biden continues to put these kind of messages out and kind of Forrest Gump his way through the election season, I think Republicans right now should just take them up on it. I mean, we should let them set this narrative and just pound it back in right at them, because this is not going to be. These are not messages that the American people want to hear, and they are not messages that are going to resonate. Certainly not in red states, but not with independents or even some Democrats, as we're seeing in these blue states. So that looks like that'll do it for us this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And remember to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next week.